What if you were to take everything that happened to Spider-Man and tell it in one complete 60-year history? That is Spider-Man Life's story, and we are the Comicstorian channel, where we take some of your favorite trade paperbacks and single issues and we break them down into digestible bites to help you understand. Then we read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the art and panels is to prevent copyright problems with their respective owners. Today we're going to be doing the full story for Spider-Man Life Story. Every issue of this was a decade in the life of Spider-Man, so we released it as an individual issue for each decade of Spider-Man's life. But I think it's time for us to put it all together and show you the 60-year history of Spider-Man told in chronological order. I hope you guys enjoy. Four years since the bite. 4 years since the pain faded. 4 years since Uncle Ben was taken. It's 1966 and Spider-Man leaps through the city, spinning and flipping from rooftop to rooftop. He's finally getting the hang of this superhero life. Although, he wishes that he could do the same as Peter Parker. Landing amongst the trees of the NYU campus, Peter quickly changes back into his civilian clothes and he grimaces at himself. He missed 2 classes while putting Mysterio away this morning. Coming from behind the trees, Peter sees the protesters like always, their signs questioning and crying against the war in Vietnam. Not for the first time, Peter questions whether he should join, whether he should be over there, using his powers for some good, help with this battle. "Hey Parker," Harry yells, interrupting the thoughts reeling through Peter's head. The two friends greet each other as Norman Osborn grumbles from behind the wheel, staring at his watch, and Harry introduces them, and the two shake hands. "Call me Norman, Peter. I've been following you," Norman says with a strange smile. For an instant, Peter leans back, but Norman explains that he's been following Peter's academic trajectory, questioning whether Peter would like an internship at Oscorp. Peter declines, telling the billionaire that he has an internship at the Baxter Building. Harry tells his father goodbye, and the two men head inside of the college building. It's inside of there that Peter finally meets up with his lab partner, the beautiful Gwen Stacy. Sorry, my aunt," Peter begins to explain as Gwen looks at him disapprovingly. "Your Aunt May is a real convenient excuse, Pete. I don't even know why I give you the time of day," she tells him. But she lets it go, telling him what module they're currently studying as she hands him a beaker. Their hands touch and a familiar spark passes through them. But the moment is in ruins as Professor Miles Warren interrupts them, once again telling Peter not to drag down Miss Stacy with you. The professor moves away and class quickly ends. And before they leave, Gwen tells Peter that she'll see him at Flash's going away party that evening. "Yeah, just have to get my hands on some scratch so that I can actually buy you an apology drink." And later that day, Peter finds himself standing in the office of J. Jonah Jameson, editor of the Daily Bugle. "Trash, trash, trash, and not the good kind of trash either," the hot-headed editor yells, throwing the pictures back on his desk, yelling at Peter Parker about his poor quality. "Damn it, Parker! I need good, clear photos of Spider-Man committing crimes!" he bellows. Once again, Peter tries to defend the web-slinger, letting Jameson know that he's a hero, not a crook. But the man interrupts him. "Shut it! Here's a slip for $20 for the lot of them. And after this, I don't want you breathing on my door without the pictures that I actually want." Peter leaves the office with Jonah bellowing behind him, and outside he speaks with Betty Brant for a moment while she goes to get his money. The news flashes on the TV, showing how Iron Man had stepped in and saved some soldiers while fighting in Saigon. The reporters let him know that the entire city is looking for Captain America, questioning whether the symbol of freedom would be joining the conflict. If Cap signs up after having already sacrificed during World War II, what excuse would I have? Parker questions himself. That night, Harry joins his group of friends at Slim's bar, his father in tow, as they say goodbye to Flash Thompson. And inside, Harry is quickly forgotten by his father as the man congratulates Flash for having joined the army voluntarily instead of being drafted. "My son here doesn't believe in the war effort. Frankly, I'm not sure what he believes in, but it does my heart good to see that he has friends that are true heroes," Norman tells Flash. Harry moves away, his usual feelings about his father showing on his face, and Gwen and Mary Jane try to comfort him. But the whole group is interrupted as Peter finally makes his grand entrance. "Did Flash screw up and tell us his made-up war stories already?" he asks with a grin. "Har har, Parker! Little early for your jealousy to come out, isn't it?" Flash asks him quickly, and quickly the jokes turn harsh and the two young men are yelling at each other. Gwen steps in, pushing Peter away. "What's gotten into you?" she demands. "I know you and Flash have a history, but that man is leaving for war. You may not agree with it, but he's leaving on Saturday, Peter. You and I both know he might not be coming back from that, she tells him. Don't let the last thing you say to him be that. So, a few minutes go by and Peter once again walks over to Flash. Hey, I'm sorry, man. Peter tells him, explaining that high school wasn't easy for him, and a large part of that is because of Flash. I know we've grown past who we were, but sometimes I'm still there and I snap at you because I can, he tells the young soldier, whose eyes are staring at the floor. Flash understands. He knows that Peter doesn't understand why he joined in the first place. I did it because it's what Spider-Man would do, Flash explains. Peter is stunned, questioning what Flash means. You know I'm his #1 fan, well, now I can do what he does. I can help people, Flash tells him. Peter is still stunned, trying to tell Flash that Spider-Man isn't going over there either. But Flash smiles. Yeah, because he's pretty busy saving our bacon every day. But I tell you, if the war keeps going on, I'll bet you'll see him fighting over there real soon, Flash tells him, putting his hand on Peter's shoulder. Flash heads off, leaving Peter alone with those thoughts sitting at the bar. And eventually, Norman sits next to him, offering to buy his drink, since he knows that Aunt May's medical bills have been piling up. How did you? Peter questions, startled. Norman smiles, offering that maybe Harry told him. Or maybe I've been following you. Maybe following you has become my new hobby because I know you. The real you, Norman tells him with an evil smile. Peter's spider sense begins to go haywire as the billionaire tells him, look over at the bar, Parker. Peter stares up, seeing the pumpkin bombs sitting amongst the bottles of alcohol. I have hidden 10 of those around the bar. If you attempt to deactivate them or warn anyone, I will detonate them. You'd survive, I'd survive, but what about the rest of them? Norman leans in, ordering Peter to wait 30 seconds before following him into the alleyway. Peter looks back at his friends all crowded together, and finally he gets up, walking outside. In the alleyway, he finds Norman putting on the last of the Green Goblin costume. Spider-Man, he hisses with a vicious grin. He turns, shooting a blast that cracks against the wall. The pest who has been ruining my plans. Peter leaps into the air, swinging away quickly, hoping that Norman's detonator has a short range. You coward! I don't want to kill you, the opposite, in fact. Goblin yells, flying after the web slinger on his glider. The Goblin fires his finger blast at Peter, knocking him out of the sky as he bounces and tumbles along a rooftop. He struggles to get up onto his knees, his head swimming from the blast in the fall. And that's when his spider sense goes off again. He looks up to see pumpkin bombs rolling towards him, the blast chucking him away. Quickly, the Goblin grabs him, smiling as he pulls him in close. I want you to live! You are my heir, it's obvious. You're nuts! Peter gasps, barely conscious. No, I speak with clarity. Clarity afforded to me by my goblin serum. But Peter shoots his webs towards the Goblin, pulling down the billboard onto the villain's head. He leaps away, quickly ditching the civilian clothes to grab a spider suit, and he stops, looking back at the destruction. He can just leave Norman there. His secret will be safe. His friends will be safe. All right, Osborn, it's over. He snarls, lifting the wreckage off of the villain. He couldn't leave a villain to die. I'm going to make you rot in prison, even if it means... But Peter is interrupted as Norman comes to, startled and surprised by the web slinger. Spider-Man? What's happening? He questions. Peter is shocked. Norman doesn't remember anything. His spider sense is quiet, telling Peter that Norman is telling the truth. So, he brings the billionaire home, telling him that he was attacked on his way home from a costume party. Peter reads about it in the paper the next day. And life goes on. Peter must live with the fact that Norman could remember at any minute. He swings through the city, thinking on this before he stops, leaping into a fight with Captain America against a few robbers. One of the goons pulls out a gun on the American hero from behind, and Spidey whips the weapon away. You need a permit to shoot an American icon, he jokes. But Cap knocks the thug out with a quick throw from the shield. Spider-Man watches from above as people begin to swarm the hero, questioning him about his thoughts on the war and if he would soon be joining. Cap quickly leaps away, escaping onto a nearby rooftop where Spider-Man catches up. Thanks for the assist back there, Spider-Man. Didn't mean to run out on you, it's just... Spidey gets him. He knows what it's like having people running you down. Cap nods, telling him that everyone is questioning him about the war. I spent 2 decades on ice to wake up to the end of one war and find myself facing another war, a very different war, Cap tells him. He tells him that he's going to see if this war is right with his own eyes. What do? I have powers. Shouldn't I have a responsibility to go, Cap? Spider-Man asks, but Cap puts his hand on the young man's shoulder. Everyone has their own journey. This is mine. You do good work. I see that every day. Responsibility is about a lot of things, but first, it's about selflessness and sacrifice. Seeing you throw yourself into danger, it's clear that you understand both of these things, Spider-Man. Let your heart guide you. I'll see you soon, Cap tells him as he turns away. Thanks, Cap. I'll see you soon. Peter knows what he has to do. He goes to turn Norman in, knowing that the man needs to go to jail regardless of whether his secret will come out. It doesn't take the police long to discover the secret Goblin bunkers, but Peter suddenly remembers as he watches them take Norman away that he's late for Flash's send-off. Quickly, he swings through the city, hoping to reach Grand Central Station before the young soldier leaves, and he sees Gwen amongst that crowd, asking which platform Flash Thompson is on. But Gwen tells him that he just left 20 minutes ago. Gwen questions him, questions why he does this to people. And finally, Peter makes a decision. Gwen turns, seeing a spider suit beneath his shirt, and she asks Peter, "What is this?" She asks, staring at him. Now it's 1967. The soldiers move through the Vietnam jungle, coming upon a village. They order the villagers to get down, but no one understands each other. Tensions are high. The men are shouting, weapons are raised, when suddenly a shield flies out of the jungle, knocking the soldiers to the ground as it bounces among them. "Heard you turn traitor," one of the soldiers growls from the mud. "Shut up. You go back and tell Iron Man. These people, they're under my protection," Steve Rogers growls, stepping out of the jungle. The wind howls over the cemetery as Spider-Man stands before a gravestone. And Harry, he's in charge now. I think he's happy. It's hard to tell, Peter continues, filling in the dead in the past events. Gwen is suddenly behind him, interrupting the story. "Honey, I thought you were..." Peter begins, turning around. "Skipped out early. I figured I'd find you here. Anniversary of his death, your unreasonable Parker guilt, his wife," Gwen Stacy tells him. Peter nods, turning back to the grave. He knows that he could have saved him. "How can we be happy? How can any of us?" he questions, and Gwen takes Peter's face in her hands, telling her husband that he's allowed to be happy. "The dead don't want you to wallow, Peter. They want you to live." She takes his hand, and the two of them walk away, leaving behind the gravestone of Eugene Flash Thompson. Inside of the Baxter building, Peter ponders over what his wife told him while working on another project for Reed Richards. He turns, hearing Reed muttering about the insanity of the war. "It's all our fault. The only sane superhero in that conflict is Captain America. Going rogue, saving lives on both sides?" he tells Peter, stretching his arm, throwing the paper into the recycling bin. But Peter disagrees, believing that maybe that's why the war continues. "No, it's still going because Tony Stark and his iron lackey keep us in the game. We have a moral obligation to help," Peter tells Reed. But they're both interrupted by Dr. Otto Octavius, who smiles, handing them coffee. He tells them that they're doing great work here, and yet the two have always felt the need to argue over the path others have taken. "I took a similar path until you offered me this chance." Peter takes the coffee, walking away, marveling once again about how one of his greatest enemies managed to turn his life around, even going so far as to begin dating Aunt May. But Peter stops, staring at the city, once again thinking that even with all of the good they're doing at the Baxter building, the way the world is, why shouldn't they do more? Meanwhile, Harry Osborn turns over all of his possessions to the state prison, wondering out loud if this is a little excessive. He sits down, looking through the glass at his father, wearing a prison orange jumpsuit. "Harry, you look like crap," Norman comments. Harry's about to leave, but Norman stops him, commenting on how well he knows his son is doing, how he's keeping the company afloat in a time of crisis. "I've been hearing word that the Gemini project is out of control. I need you to rescue the asset before all is lost," he tells him, but Harry stands up, telling his father that this is crazy. But Norman tells him to calm down and sit. "I told you about me being the Green Goblin and about my sickness. About Spider-Man ruining my life, not giving me a chance. If you do this, he might interfere. If he does, I have one more secret to tell you." And as Norman tells his son, his eyes widen in shock. At Cypro Genesis, Peter leans on the desk, telling his wife about the argument that he had with Reed today. "Honey, I love you, but you need to stop poking the man," Gwen tells him, continuing her work. "Yeah, easy for you to say. You and Professor Warren actually are doing good work together, recreating limbs for people. You even managed to help fix poor Kirk Connors," he tells her, looking around at all the cloned limbs floating in the jars. Professor Warren interrupts them, letting Peter know that they couldn't have helped Connors if he hadn't come up with a cure for the lizard. When Gwen informs Warren about Peter's day, their old teacher offers Peter a job if things get worse with Reed. "Honestly, we need help with the machines and the computers, which are a little beyond our scope," Professor Warren tells him. Peter thanks the man, and the two walk away, with Gwen telling Peter to have fun at MJ's party without her tonight. Unknown to the both of them, though, Miles Warren watches as they leave.
After swinging across town, Peter changes back into his civilian clothes and enters the club. Loud music and flashing lights bathe the club goers that crowd the dance floor. Just suck it up, at least you were on the list. He thinks to himself, knowing that this isn't his kind of party. A woman walks over, offering to lead Peter up to the VIP section. "Peter!" Mary Jane cries as he walks in. "Hey, MJ, did I miss your set?" he asks sheepishly. "God, no! I don't even hit the DJ booth until midnight," he tells her with a smile, and Peter lets her know that he doesn't know if he's gonna make it to midnight. "This isn't really my scene, MJ." MJ just laughs, wondering when Peter got so old, and he smiles, asking about Harry, and turning as MJ points to the man passed out in a drug-induced stupor. "It's fine. It just means that I don't have to babysit him all night and listen to his high-finance tales." "Are you and Harry all right, MJ?" Peter asks, looking at both of his friends. Anger flashes in her eyes, though, and she tells Peter that their lives are fine. "We work, Peter. We all aren't as perfect as you and your lab bunny," she snaps at him. "Out of everyone in the group, you're always the stick in the mud, the one with the fake concern, but you never actually do anything, do you, Peter?" she demands. Peter snaps at her, getting angry, knowing that MJ is drunk, and turns and storms away. But MJ isn't done as she shouts after him, "You just wallow in regrets. You love them. Instead of telling him he was making a mistake, you could have saved Flash with all of your power." Peter's stunned. He stops, turning back to her, eyes wide. "I know, Peter. I've known since I was 15, watching you come and go from Aunt May's house." Peter doesn't know what to say, but it doesn't matter as MJ turns away from him. "You spent a decade convincing yourself you were doing the right thing while your friend is dead, Spider-Man," she tells him. The next day, Peter goes to his office, barely aware of what's even going on, and Reed comes out questioning him, but Peter turns it around on him. He questions why they never do anything with the amazing technology that Reed Richards has created, things that could change people's lives. But Reed knows where Peter is going with this argument. The technologies like their unstable molecule clothing could change the world, alter the industry. But it wouldn't be possible, Reed tells him. Peter gets angry, demanding to know why Reed always acts like he's from another planet, like he isn't human. "Peter, I'm not. Neither is any other superhero. Things have changed. The wellspring of power, the growth of mutants. We need to be careful, or we'll end up ruling the world," he tells the young man. "Listen to yourself. You're so not human. Even your wife left you for a man under the sea." Peter snaps at Reed, so Reed lashes out, slapping Peter across the face, and Peter lets him before turning and walking out of the room. At their apartment, Harry finally wakes up, questioning why his wife seems so upset. But she just tells him not to worry about it. The phone rings and Harry answers, listening to the voice on the other end. "Father? Of course, I'm ready," he tells him, determination in his eyes. Meanwhile, over at Professor Warren's lab, the man questions Gwen about Peter. He questions why he always seems so quiet, seemingly holding onto all of the world's problems. "I just hope that he never pushes you away. You're the best thing that's ever happened to him," Warren tells Gwen, placing his hand on her shoulder. Suddenly, the two are interrupted by a screeching sound, and they look up to see the Black Goblin hovering over them on his glider. "Excuse me, but I have some business to conclude," the Goblin hisses. Professor Warren tries to talk to the Goblin, fear in his voice. "There's nothing to say, Professor. Your benefactor, the man who paid for all of this, would like what he was promised. He's heard word that you've broken the agreement and gone ahead with future installments. That could ruin his plans. So he sent to the Black Goblin to take what's rightfully his," the Goblin tells them, reaching out, wrapping his hand around Warren's throat. Gwen yells for them to stop, but Spider-Man is there, cracking the Goblin across the face, forcing him to let go of Warren. "What are you looking for? Money? A new superhero villain theme that hasn't been so played out?" Spider-Man jokes as he flips and dodges the Goblin's glider. The Goblin laughs, offering to show the hero what he's looking for as he tosses a pumpkin bomb at the wall. That wall explodes, tossing everyone outside, and everyone stops staring at the hole that the Goblin has created. "This can't be!" Peter gasps. "What have I done?" Harry questions, pulling off the Black Goblin mask, and everyone stares at the clone tanks, holding clones of Peter, Norman, and Gwen, anger filling Harry as he grabs Warren. "This is supposed to just be my father!" he hisses. The professor tells Harry that Norman also wanted a clone of Peter. He didn't know why. "But why me?" Gwen questions, looking at herself floating in the tank. Harry stops, anger filling him as he realizes that his father always wanted Peter to be his heir. He launches forward on the glider, pulling Spider-Man into the air as he screams at him, ripping off his mask. "It's always been about you, Peter!" Peter tries to reason with his friend as they climb higher into the air, flying above the city rooftops. He shoots out his webbing, flipping them around, kicking Harry into the rooftops below. "Don't let your dad ruin us," he tells Harry, trying to explain everything to him. "Your father is insane. I put him away before he could hurt anyone. But he's still hurting people. You, me, and now Gwen and the professor with that abomination." Harry leans onto the edge of the roof, nodding at his friend. "You're right. No more!" he yells, throwing his pumpkin bombs into the smoking hole of Professor Warren's lab. The bombs sail in, landing amongst the tanks that hold the clones, and the building explodes, sending everyone down to the street below. Professor Warren screams, "No!" Peter lands next to his wife, and she tells him that he has to save the clones. They're living beings. We can't just... Peter nods, leaping into the air. "I'm on it," he yells, flipping back inside of the building. He lands amongst the smoke and fire, but he finds that he is too late. The clone of Norman Osborn has been pierced by glass, dead after the first explosion. He turns, finding the Gwen Stacy clone in the same situation, and only the clone of himself struggling to move, as it has the same powers as himself. He grabs the clone, leaping back into the street. "Sorry, gang. Could only save Frank and Peter here," he tells them, and Warren begins to cry again, running back towards the building, screaming for Gwen. But Peter stops him with a web strand. The professor turns back towards the madness in his eyes. "You don't understand! I wanted Gwen all to myself," he yells. "No substitutes!" Both Peter and Gwen's eyes go wide as they realize what he is saying. "You never would have known that your wife was a clone, while I held on to Gwendolyn until we were able to leave." Peter screams, realizing what this means. That the Gwen in the tube that has died was his wife, and that he is standing next to her clone. He moves fast, leaping back into the building, and the clone Gwen stares in shock, unbelieving of what she has just heard. Inside the fire, Peter holds onto his true wife, tears streaming down his face. It is now 1978. MJ puts the last piece of luggage in the car, apologizing that Peter refused to come down. But both of them understand, the clone of Peter smiling down at Gwen. "We get a second chance. As Ben and Helen Parker," she smiles. They hug MJ, but before getting into the car and leaving, MJ goes back inside, finding Peter sitting at his desk. He's angry. Angry that clone Gwen and clone Peter have a new life and he has lost everything. "Harry disappeared and left you everything. You have a new life. Where's my new life, MJ?" He shouts at her, turning away. "I have nothing," he whispers, and MJ takes him into her arms as he begins to cry. "Oh, Peter, that's not true at all." MJ closes her eyes. She's sitting in a hospital bed, her hands folded over her pregnant stomach. It's been 3 weeks since Peter has gone missing. He's never been gone this long. "Gwen?" a shaky voice asks next to her. "Where's Peter?" Aunt May asks next to her eyes not fully seeing where she is. "It's Mary J, May. Peter's on his way," MJ tells her, smiling as best as she can. MJ turns, looking at the tracker that Peter has installed on his suit, but it says that he's nowhere on Earth. "Where are you?" she thinks quietly. Right now it's 1984, and on the planet known as Battleworld, Spider-Man fights alongside his fellow heroes in a war for the entertainment of a being known as the Beyonder. After the battle, he sits, trying to piece together his destroyed costume, and Reed enters the room, trying his best to make amends for their differences in the past. "Parker Industries, it's fantastic. You should be proud. I'm proud. I just wanted you to know that, son, in case," he tells the younger man, and Peter nods, apologizing for how they left things years ago. Reed nods, leaving him alone, and Peter knows that the man is a warning for what happens when you push away everyone that you love. He pulls back on his tattered mask, bringing laughs from both Thor and the Hulk. "Look, Thor, we can't all have Asgardian tailors," he points out, but the god laughs, telling him that their uniforms were created by a machine in the next room. "It's over there. Just think of what you want and it'll make it for you," Hulk tells Peter as he sits down at the machine, and suddenly a black ball of goo sits before him. He picks it up and it begins to meld with his body. 2 more weeks pass and the city is amazed to see a black-suited Spider-Man swinging over the rooftops. Peter races home, trying to get back to his family now that the whole ordeal is over, but he feels that something is off, like the city is too quiet. When he finally arrives home, he enters the apartment and MJ comes out of the bathroom, wrapping a towel around her. "MJ, I'm so sorry," Peter begins, but MJ screams in fear, not recognizing him in the new black costume. The mask pulls away from his head and MJ stares in shock before wrapping her arms around him. Peter, oh my God, I thought, she begins to state. Peter turns, looking at the crib that sits in the middle of the room. Are the babies? And MJ looks over her shoulder, smiling. We hit the jackpot. Meet Claire and Benjamin. Tears begin to fill his eyes as he stares down at his twin children. He begins to break down. I'm so sorry, I wasn't here. He cries out, but MJ just holds him, telling him that it's all right. She fills him in on what happened while he was gone. After the heroes all disappeared wherever they went, America and Russia both went to war, with a missile launching at the US. Vision managed to alter the course of the missile and managed to save Manhattan, and the missile landed in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Vision managed to become intangible as the missile impacted, saving him, but he had to watch everything. He's still intangible and no one knows why. More weeks go by and Peter begins to walk the site of the impact, working with his company to help clean up the radiation that is in the air. Vision stands there staring out into the destruction. Peter slips his hand through the hero, sadness on both of their faces. He goes back inside of their bunker, explaining to Reed that there is still no change with Vision, although it looks like their efforts to clean up the radiation is working. Reed nods before handing him the newspaper showing a man running around in a black Spider-Man suit with a rifle and killing people. Looks like you have some problems back at home, Pete. Peter shakes his head, questioning whether he should change his suit back since he's never had copycats before. Reed nods before he explains something that he learned about Peter's suit. Pete, your suit is alive. It's a symbiote, attaching itself to you both mentally and physically, Reed explains. I know, Peter tells him, and Reed is shocked that Peter would knowingly wear the suit. Peter explains that he's known for some time that this suit is alive. I've been wearing it sparingly to stop full bonding. I even gave Mary Jane a way to stop me in case I lose control. I'm getting old, Reed. Slowing down, the suit, it helps. I need to stay strong to protect people, to stay relevant, Peter explains, but the two are interrupted as Peter's phone begins to buzz. Mary Jane is breathless, telling Peter that Aunt May has disappeared and taken the children with her. Peter rushes home, bursting through the front door, and the police try to stop him, but MJ quickly explains who Peter is. Luckily, the police have found Aunt May and brought her back. She's fine. She was wandering down 8th. An officer found her staring into a shop window with Claire and Benji crying in the stroller. MJ explains. The officers excuse themselves, letting them know that if they need any more suggestions to just call. Peter is suspicious though, asking the officer what that means, and MJ explains that they were discussing senior homes. Absolutely not! Peter yells angry, and the babies begin to cry as Peter tells MJ that he refuses to put May into a home. She raised me when my parents died, took care of me when no one else would. MJ interrupts him. Then take care of her, Pete! She yells back. I'm fine with you ignoring me, but not your children. You need to be here for them. Peter turns away, his clothes morphing back into the black Spider-Man suit. Even that stupid suit is interfering. You act like you're addicted to it, she tells him. He walks into the next room, removing the costume, placing it into a holding tank. Everyone thinks they know what's best for me, huh? I don't need the suit. Then what do you need, Peter? Do you even know? MJ asks him. Peter nods, pulling back on his old costume. Yeah, I do. Air, he tells her as he leaps out the window, swinging through the buildings of the city, knowing that MJ is right. The world is at war and Peter is everywhere but with his family. And the sky rumbles and the rain begins to fall on his head. So he stops, staring down at the city. And as he stands there thinking to himself, he turns around to see the imposter aiming a bolt-action rifle at him. He dodges quickly with the round cracking against the brick of the roof. Whoa, pal! I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but they make guns that fire more than one bullet, he explains. He leaps at the man, knocking him down, grabbing and tearing his mask off to see the face of Kraven the Hunter. He leans back startled, and a knife comes up, stabbing into his side. He can feel it. The blade is laced with poison, coursing through him. Rain continues to pelt down on them as Kraven stands over the web slinger. He explains that their countries both fight now, that he knows that his adopted country is bereft of a hero. He picks up his rifle and he walks over to the downed hero. I'm dying of cancer, yet I'm still stronger than you. You are weak, Spider, and growing weaker. To see this happen, to see you barely exist anymore, it's heartbreaking. Kraven takes aim with his rifle. You were once beautiful. You were once a warrior, so you deserve a warrior's exit. Peter tries to speak, but his words come out in a struggle. Kraven, no! I have a wife, kids! And the gunshot echoes through the night air. Peter awakens in the dark. He feels like he's in bed. His hands reach out, and they hit the wood close by, the wood right in front of him. The air is thin, and he screams a scream that no one will hear. Back at their home, MJ is venting, speaking to Aunt May even though she is watching the news without really seeing it, and a loud clicking noise can be heard. "Dear, I think someone is at the door," May mutters. MJ nods, moving into the lab, her eyes going wide as she stares at the symbiote, slamming itself against the glass that is its holding tank. It finally shatters and a strange blob flies out, smashing through the window, escaping into the city. MJ knows. It's desperate to find Peter. Something happened. In the cemetery, the symbiote slithers over a gravestone that marks the final resting place of Spider-Man. Beneath the earth, Peter knows that he is too weak and too old to escape, but the symbiote drills through the ground, burrowing into the earth. Moments pass as the rain continues to fall, and the ground seems to shake, ripping apart as the monster tears its way free, screaming in rage into the night. In a dark alley, a group of thugs are robbing a businessman, and suddenly Kraven is amongst them, his fists lashing out, knocking them back. One of the thugs grabs the man, putting a knife to his throat, ordering him to stay back. He pauses though, looking over the imposter Spider-Man's shoulder. Kraven looks back over his shoulder to see the monstrous Spider-Man behind him, lifting him into the air. "You stabbed me! You shot me! You buried me!" he bellows, slamming the man hard into the wall, hard enough to crack the brick. "It's over, Kraven! I'm going to kill you!" he snarls. But MJ is there, a device in her hand, Kraven looking at Spider-Man. "Look at you. You've done what you needed to. You are so beautiful," Kraven gasps, smiling. And Spider-Man stops, realizing what he's become. He turns to his wife, telling her to do what needs to be done as she stumbles, not sure that she can aim the device. The mask slides away from his face, and Peter asks her, "Please, I love you, MJ." She pulls the trigger, sending a sonic blast that throws the symbiote off of Peter. It slides away, and MJ holds her husband as the rain falls down around them. Later, Peter is sitting in their home as the movers finish taking the boxes away. He glances at MJ as she finishes prepping to take the babies with her. She has no choice. Peter cries into his hands as she walks out of his life. And in his own home, Kraven stares out into the rising sun, a rifle in his hand. He did what he had to. He turns Spider-Man into the hunter that he needed to be. He places the barrel into his mouth, and he moves to pull the trigger. But the symbiote wraps around his hand and the rifle, stopping him. "1995. The inferno blazes bright into the night sky, firefighters blasting the heat trying to put out the flames. That's the fourth downtown fire this week," Ben Reilly comments, getting out of the car with his partner. She nods, telling him to get some good pictures while she goes and speaks with the fire chief. "Did anyone actually make it?" Ben questions. "Because if not, I should head in and help," he whispers to himself. When suddenly a metallic tentacle smashes into the ground and Ben turns shocked. "I was hoping to draw out the mysterious Chicago vigilante, the Red Mask, face to face for the first time, in a manner of speaking, with Dr. Octopus." His octopus tentacles wrapping around the head of Ben's partner, lifting her into the air. Otto smiles down at Ben, his face showing his advanced years. "Hello, Ben Reilly. I saw you at May's funeral, lurking in the distance. I thought you were a shameful relative, but when I found out the truth, I had to have you," Otto tells him. "So if you don't want this lady's head crushed, you'll come with me." Meanwhile, over at Parker Industries in New York, Tony Stark sits across from Peter at the offices of Parker Industries, once again pushing the man to merge with Stark Industries. "Come on, Peter. You're a smart man. What do I have to do to make this happen?" He finally finishes. Peter stares at him for a moment before answering. "Stop making weapons," Peter says simply. Stark stares, stunned for a moment before lashing out at Peter. His weapons won the Russian war. They saved lives. "My weapons keep peace across the world. You make cell phones and adhesives," he snarls. Tony threatens a hostile takeover. Give Peter more time with his wife and his kids. Peter stands, throwing his own words back at Stark. He knows that Tony helped America, but his weapons also helped regimes and terrorists who have gotten a hold of them. "If you ever insinuate that I wouldn't do anything to protect my children, I'll beat you so fast your bodyguard Iron Man will be looking for job listings next week. Get the hell out of my office," he demands. As Tony storms out, the phone beeps and Peter answers it to find Jessica Jones on the other line. She wants to give him an update on the case that she's been working, letting him know that the guy that she's been watching is still in Jersey, still in the industrial area. "So with business concluded, your place or mine tonight?" she asks, a smile on her face. Peter glances at the photo of MJ and the kids on his desk. "Neither. Sorry, Jess," he tells her.
explaining that he's just tired, letting her know as he enters his costume vault, which is hidden in his office, looking up at his spider suit. He moves through the city, still saving lives, fighting crimes, everything that he can. After stopping a mugging, the radio in his mask picks up a police call. Doc Ock is tearing apart the city, screaming for Spider-Man to face him. So Spidey swings in, avoiding a bus as it flies through the air. He flips, shooting his webbing, rolling under the large vehicle, and he catches it, feeling the strain on his back and his legs. Doc says I should only catch cars these days, he thinks to himself. Spider-Man, or should I say Peter? Ock smiles at him, drawing closer. The arms fling vehicles around them, and Peter knows that he's lost. He moves, cartwheeling to catch the cars as quickly as he can, his body straining past its limits. Well done, Peter. Saved the day yet again, Otto tells him, his tentacle moving fast, shooting a gas into Peter's face and knocking him out. Your aunt would be so proud. Peter awakens, strapped to a table. Harry Osborn sitting before him, apologizing. He threatened. I had no choice, Harry tells him. And across from him sits Ben Reilly, who also doesn't know what's going on. A family reunion, brothers and their stepfather. Otto notes, his arms moving along the terminals that surround them. Peter tries to reason with him. Don't ruin May's memory with whatever you're planning with Ben and me, he asks. But Otto gets quiet. May was his everything. And when he realized that her nephew was Spider-Man, it all made sense. You made her leave me. My oldest enemy couldn't stand us being happy, he snarls. Otto wants to join her in death, but he can't. He has too much to do, which is why he needs the data on Miles Warren's clones. I need both of you to study, to see if there are any faults in the process. He stares at the screens as he is shocked to learn the truth. Peter Parker is the clone, he gasps. Peter turns to Ben, struggling to tell the man that he had no idea, but anger flashes through Ben Reilly's eyes, and he rips himself free, screaming how Otto and every other villain has ruined his life. Ben begins to beat the heck out of Otto, his fist smashing into his face, punctuated by screams of rage. Harry frees Peter, and the man pulls Ben off the elderly villain. Ben, stop! You're going to kill him, he yells, tears filling Ben's eyes, and Peter explains that he had no idea. You and I are the same. You have to know that I didn't know. I wouldn't have kept that from you, he tells the real Peter. None of them notice Otto stirring on the floor behind them. Two infernal Peter Parkers. I can still get their secrets from their corpses, he hisses, and a tentacle moves fast, flashing through the air. Ben Reilly leaps out of the way, but the metal end flies towards Peter. Harry jumps in the way, gasping as the blade pierces his chest. I didn't mean to! Otto cries, leaping through the window, trying to escape. Ben jumps after him, but another tentacle knocks him out, and he plummets towards the pavement below. Luckily, Peter catches him with a strand of webbing. He hears a gasp from behind him, and he rushes back to his old friend. With his dying breath, Harry apologizes for everything that he did, everything that his father did. Tears stream down Peter's face as Harry Osborn dies in his arms. Time passes, and Ben meets Peter on the roof across from Parker Industries. When questioned why, Peter tells Ben that they both know that he's the real Peter. They both looked over Otto's results. He wasn't lying. You're the original. Ben nods, explaining that he lived so long as Ben, he wouldn't even know where to begin. Peter nods, pulling out a notebook and handing it to him. It's your life, the one you've been living for the last 20 years. As comprehensive as I could make it, he tells him. Peter looks out over the city, knowing that he has lived his life being Spider-Man and building his company. He's tired. He knows that Ben will be able to take over and live the life that he should have. So take it. Peter Parker, it's all yours. He turns, he walks away, but Ben calls out for him to stop, reaching into his pocket, pulling out a solid red Spider-Man mask. He explains that he knows he promised to lead a quiet life, but he couldn't ignore his sense of responsibility. They hug, saying their goodbyes, and Peter finally leaves. He drives to Jersey, arriving at the address that Jessica Jones has given him. And outside there is a guard. The man glares at him until Peter lifts a motorcycle over his head with one hand, and the man runs. Peter enters, looking at the old man sitting amongst all of his old Green Goblin equipment. Norman, Peter simply states. The man looks up, smiling at the esteemed Peter Parker. I know, Norman. Drop the crazy old man shtick. Ever since you were released from prison, you've been pretending to be broken. Then you went missing, but I kept tabs, Peter tells him, looking at Norman's old glider. He knows that he told Otto about him being Spider-Man, tried to make him think that he was the clone. But I did my own testing. I'm still the original. I'm still Peter Parker. Clever boy, Norman laughs, wheezing. But I bet there was a moment of doubt, wasn't there? I wish I was there to see your face. Peter shakes his head. He had felt a moment of clarity. Norman struggles to his feet, promising that he'll destroy Peter, destroy his company. He'll use Harry to help him. Peter's shocked, realizing that Norman doesn't know. Harry's dead. Otto killed him. For all of his evil, Norman finally breaks down, crumbling to the floor in tears over his dead son. He suddenly screams in rage, blaming Peter for his son's death, and the glider screams across the room, but Peter catches it, crumbling it in his hands. He tells Norman that it's over, but the villain refuses, screaming at Peter, and suddenly he clutches his chest. Peter catches the villain, and Norman stares up at him, anger in his eyes as he gasps his final words. "Hate you." And then he passes. Peter leaves him there, traveling across the country, and finally he pulls up in front of a house in Portland. 2 children run out to greet him. Peter hugs his children, and with tears in his eyes, he looks at MJ, and he says that they can finally all go inside.
Spider-Man is slammed hard into a car, crumpling it. He stares out from his tattered and torn mask, and he lifts the car, throwing it back at his enemy. Morlun merely knocks the car aside, staring at Spider-Man. "I thought you were the one, but you aren't, are you? You're an imposter, a copy," he says simply. Spider-Man leaps at him, punching him again and again, but it seems to have no effect, so Morlun reaches out, grabbing Spidey by the throat, holding him at bay. "Did he think that he could trick me? I'm not some man in a costume, some simpleton robbing banks." Peter stares, his eyes widen as he feels the life being drained out of his body. "I am forever. I will feed," Morlun tells the husk that was once Spider-Man. 2006. Peter Parker stands outside of his home talking to his daughter while he chops wood. Once again, they agree on what she should be doing with her life, what responsibility they both have. Benji comes running out, yelling for them both, and inside they find Mary Jane watching the news, shocked at what they were reporting. The screen shows Spider-Man dead in New York. His identity finally revealed to be Peter Parker. Peter Parker is shocked, staring at the screen, seeing his clone, the one that once went by the name Ben Reilly, now dead. "No, this can't be. Ezekiel was right," he whispers, and MJ doesn't understand, but Peter explains that a man named Ezekiel came to him and told him that he was some sort of spider totem, that a creature named Morlun would eventually come to try and feed on him. "Peter, we have to run. Can this Morlun guy find us?" But Peter knows that Morlun is after him. He knows that he needs to run to figure out how the guy can track him. Oh God, and Stark, he's gonna take my company. He suddenly realizes, with MJ not believing how he can think of the company at a time like this. As Peter is packing up the bedroom, Claire comes in explaining to her father how he can't run from this. Ben Reilly became Peter Parker, running Parker Industries, staving off a hostile takeover from Stark Industries, and then battled Morlun until he died. Now the real Peter Parker needs to go back to New York and face this Morlun. Needs to be Spider-Man again. She knows that her father put on Ben's old mask once before, and has been a hero since giving up the title Spider-Man. You can't just wait for injustice to cross our path while people get hurt somewhere. You have the power. You have to fight for a better tomorrow. You have to be a hero, she explains to her father. Later, Peter is walking down the streets of New York. He just left the Daily Bugle, where he had given the editor Betty Brant the story about how someone had created a clone of him with Spider-Man's powers. He knew that eventually the whole truth would come out, and he had hoped that he could buy some time and draw Morlun out. As he walks up the steps of Parker Industries, lost in his own thoughts, he finally looks up, and standing before him is the Secretary of Defense, Tony Stark. "Hello, Peter. Back from the dead, eh? How lucky," the man says to him, a small smile on his face. But Peter tries to push him aside. He doesn't want to deal with whatever Tony is peddling. But Tony looks the man up and down with his glasses. Special Stark tech. He knows the truth. He knows that Peter is really Spider-Man. Tony tells Peter Parker that the civil war between the heroes is getting worse. Steve Rogers and his resistance are getting people hurt. Because if you didn't register under the Superhuman Act, we have grounds to seize your assets as they may be unfairly acquired through powers, Tony explains to him. "I can grant you amnesty. You can pass off your company shares to your family. You just have to come quietly, receive training, become a U.S. Avenger on the side of law and justice. What do you say?" Peter glares at him, telling him to drop dead. Behind him, his squad of Avengers lands, and Tony shakes his head. "Really wish you hadn't said that, Pete. Now we have to do this the hard way. Back at their house in Portland, Benji and Claire can't get their mother to turn off the news that's constantly playing, talking about Peter Parker. Claire turns away, looking out the front window into their lawn, and her eyes widen with fear and shock as she turns back to her family. "Mom! Benji! Grab Mommy! Head out!" She begins to scream, but her words are cut short as the front of the house explodes, and through the destruction, Morlun enters the home. "Hello, Parkers. Is Peter home?" he asks with a vicious smile. Back in the city, Peter is pushing himself faster than he has in years, dodging blasts and attacks from Stark's Avengers. "You can't win this fight, Peter! You know that!" Tony yells at him, now clad in his armor, but Peter tries to get away, working his way up a building. As a blast takes out the wall, he's thrown back down to the earth, and Tony hits him hard, bouncing the old man off of the side of a bus. Beating up on people, arresting people, who've only ever saved lives. "How do you sleep at night, Tony?" Peter asks, struggling to his feet, and the Avengers hit him again, knocking him into another blow from Tony. "To tell you the truth, Peter, I haven't slept in years," Tony tells him, reaching down, arresting Peter, when suddenly a shield flies out, cracking Black Widow in the head. "Avengers, assemble!" Captain America cries out, leading his team of heroes into the fight. Back in Portland, Benji and Claire carry their mother outside, trying to escape, and they find the family car totals. "It seems that the spider has fled," Morlun notes, following them outside. "Such a shame. I wonder where I could get a snack." He smiles, and the twins step between the monster and their mother, rushing him together. Morlun knocks Claire aside as Benji kicks him hard in the face, but Morlun throws him away, grasping Claire by the throat as he begins to drain her. She feels the energy leaving her body, and she lashes out, cutting his face. He staggers, wounded, giving them time to rush into the woods. But back in New York City, the heroes clash as Peter races up to the side of Parker Industries. He smashes through the window, entering the office that he hasn't been in years. He opens up the vault, looking at the decades of costumes that are now there to greet him. Meanwhile, the kids keep running, with Morlun crashing through the woods behind them, and Benji sees the blood on his sister's hand, realizing how they can defeat the monster. He turns back, rushing at Morlun, yelling for his sister to attack when the creature is feeding. "The young always think they can face me, because they think they live forever." He laughs, knocking the boy down at a single blow, and he reaches down, grabbing his hand around Benji's throat, and he begins to drain him. "The curse that only belongs to me, the immortal, the indestructible," Morlun whispers, but Benji looks up, feeling the life leaving his body. "Only indestructible when you're not feeding," he gasps. And Morlun looks up sharply as Claire launches herself from behind him, cracking him across the face with a tree, knocking him away. He lands hard, impaling himself on a sharp and twisted branch. The monster dies as Claire and MJ run to Benji, cradling his wounded body. But back in the city, Spider-Man returns to the fight, leaping among Tony's Avengers, knowing that the billionaire wouldn't give them armor without a failsafe. He activates the signal, knocking down all of Tony's armored Avengers to the ground, their suits now useless. "Damn it, Peter. You don't," Tony begins, but Peter reaches out, snatching the visor from his helmet away. Tony stands there, defeated. He believes that both Cap and Spider-Man are idiots. Nothing but kids with a schoolyard sense of right and wrong. This is a war, and they will both be drafted. The armor pops off, and it reveals that Tony was piloting it remotely, and that the Tony that stood before them before was nothing more than a hologram. Hawkeye informs Cap that a helicarrier is incoming, and Steve tells Cloak to start teleporting them away. As they prepare to leave, Spider-Man apologizes for having disappeared. "I wanted to protect my wife, my kids," he tells the hero. Steve nods, knowing why Peter did it, but he also knows that if his kids have powers, Tony will come for them one day too. They both enter Cloak's portal. "You should know that an energy vampire is hunting me. We'll deal with it together, son," Captain America tells him, and Peter just laughs at Steve calling him that. "We're both old men, Cap. We need to do what old men should have done and leave the world a better place before we go." And with those words, he steps into the darkness. "I've been having the same dream lately," Peter says. He's a teenager again, walking down the hallway in his Spider-Man costume when the robber goes running fast. MJ stops him mid-story, telling him other people's dreams are boring. It's 2019. Miles Morales stands near them, politely interrupting their moment to let them know that it's time to leave. The kids come over, with Benji letting Peter know that the component will take 5 minutes to charge after they install it, and Claire once again wishing Peter would let her come. "You know I need you to stay behind, protect your brother and your mother," Peter tells her once again. Miles and Peter board the spacecraft, and the two blast off. It's been almost a decade since Victor Von Doom took advantage of the heroes fighting against each other in the Civil War. A decade since he became the ruler. I'll say this about Doom: he designs a solid spacecraft. Peter notes as they enter the Earth's atmosphere. Peter goes over the plan once again. He and Miles will dock with Tony's old space lab, and they'll attach to the Doomsday device, which will send a pulse that knocks out all of Doom's tech around the world, giving the Resistance the fighting chance that they need. They board the space station quietly, moving through the corridors with Miles leading the way, and finally they find the station and Peter begins to install the component, cracking jokes the whole time. "Enough jokes, Parker! We're on the clock!" Miles grumbles at him, bringing a strange look from Peter. "Miles, you're gonna have to take it down a notch before..." He begins, but stops as the lights suddenly go down in the station. Miles starts working on the backup power as Peter takes off, determined to find out what's going on. He stops, staring into space to see their ship destroyed and drifting away. "Miles, protect the machine! We have visitors!" Peter yells over his shoulder. Strange noises come from further in the station, and Peter begins to move forward, slowly. "Peter Parker," a voice whispers from the darkness. "We once told you that we'd go to the ends of the earth to hunt you," the voice hisses as Kraven, in the Venom suit, leaps out of the shadows. He lashes out, his claws cutting through Parker's helmet as if it's nothing. He throws Peter away, the helmet shattering from below. And suddenly Miles is there fighting against the monster. "Ah yes, the little spider. We were going to wait to hunt you until you were more of a challenge," he hisses. "You'll find that I'm more than enough for you, Sergey," Miles yells, landing blow after blow. But Kraven grabs him by the head, his claws sinking into the helmet. The symbiote begins to slip inside of Miles when suddenly he pauses. "Oh, this is rich. Well done, old friend." Kraven chuckles, and behind him, Peter suddenly attacks, using a sonic boom from his web slinger, knocking the symbiote off of Kraven. All that falls to the floor is a shattered skeleton, kept alive by Venom for decades. Miles is shocked, and Peter nods. "All my enemies are dead. Isn't that right, Otto?" Peter says, turning towards Miles. They stare at each other when suddenly, Miles launches an attack. Peter is quick, dodging the webbing and kicking. They bounce around the corridor, trying to land blows. Their spider senses allowing them to dodge quickly, but Miles is younger and faster, and he slams Peter against a wall. "Your performance as Miles was perfect! How did you do it?" he demands. Peter grunts under the attack, telling him, "I saw little things like calling Kraven Sergey." But Otto tells him that he meant to replace Peter, but he was getting too old. "Well, this young man has his entire life ahead of him," Otto tells him. He was working with Doom until Doom turned on him. So he took over Miles' body. "I'm the hero now, superior to all of you," Otto tells him. Otto smiles, telling Peter that he could beat him out of Miles' body, but prefers to beat him with his mind. And with that, the two are melded. Peter finds himself in a strange place. Otto, the real Otto, stands before Peter, telling him that he will destroy his mind. "I'm going to take over your brain like I did the young Miles. I'm going to pound you into dust," he tells him, and suddenly the Sinister Six launch themselves at Peter. "You in what army?" Peter asks, and a swarm of Spider-Men are at his side, fighting with him. The groups fight with Peter launching himself at Otto, and suddenly the groups are gone and a much younger Otto, giant in size, is looming over Peter. "No more tricks up your sleeve, any more jokes? Or are you finally ready to?" Otto stops, and he can sense her. Aunt May stands before him, staring up at the man. "Otto, what have you done?" she asks. "You were always so angry at the future. I loved you, but you could never accept the world around you or your own limitations," she tells him, sadness in her eyes. Otto looks at her, his eyes brimming with tears, telling her that it's not fair that she died. But May smiles, placing her hand on his cheek. "No, what's not fair is taking a young man's life so that you can correct your mistakes. You lived your life. I lived mine. You want to be a hero now? Let Miles go. Let your hatred for Peter go. It was never a competition for my love." She holds Otto close, and he tells her that he's scared. "It'll be okay, Otto. Trust me," she tells him. And with those words, the image of Otto disappears, drifting away in green smoke. Peter stands before the memory of his aunt. She knew what Otto wanted, and now he asks if she knows what he wants. What you want is to save Ben, but you can't. So save everyone else. You realized years ago that it will never change, so you embraced it. So go, Peter. Save everyone, she tells him. Peter snaps back as he and Miles are about to be sucked out into space, and he shoots webbing, yanking them back inside. He webs up the exploding station, trying to buy himself time as he carries Miles to the escape pod, and Otto starts to come too as Peter sees that there's only one pod. So he shoves the villain into the pod. Here's the deal, Otto. Somebody's got to stick around and make sure that this works. Be a hero. Give Miles his life back. Promise me, promise May. He tells him, and Otto tries to protest, telling him that he can help, but Peter launches the pod, standing in the burning station as that pod is rocketing to Earth. He webs the station, trying to hold it together, as the doomsday device continues to power up, and he holds. He holds with all of his might, but his webbing is running out, and the station is falling apart as the device chimes for 40 seconds. I'm sorry, Aunt May. I wish I could have been stronger, he thinks to himself, staring out into the abyss of space, when suddenly air stops and the room is darkened. He stares as the symbiote covers the hole, a spider symbol on it from its time as a hero showing. And Peter, he closes his eyes. He sees himself sitting on a bed, staring into the eyes of Mary Jane. And they're young again. I think I did it. I think everything's going to be all right, he tells her. And he asks her if the kids are going to be all right. And she nods. She tells him that she's not going anywhere. The doomsday device activates, sending its pulse over Earth, giving the resistance a fighting chance against Doom. And MJ smiles, Peter leaning down to kiss her. You're my heart, Mary Jane Watson. You're my jackpot, he tells her. And the station explodes. And there you have it. They're already working on another life story because this comic did so well. Fantastic Four life story is coming out soon, and I'm probably going to be covering it because I find it very interesting. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Please consider going to our Patreon to support videos like this and support this channel and allow this channel to keep existing so that you can enjoy the videos by going to patreon.com/Comicstorian. We have a $2 tier, a $10 tier, and that's it. So you can go there and make it super simple. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time right here.